All right. You have to have BPD to. We are technically live right now, but we're just chatting. But you have to have BPD to self-injure or self-harm. So
That's an
that could
old,
be
an old thought or theory.
right. So I think that could be honestly, a great place to kick off as we go live here. So I hit the live button before me or Amanda was ready. So welcome everyone to our live. uh, sorry about that, but we'll roll with it. I'm pumped up to chat tonight. Second interview with Amanda. If you haven't seen the first one, they're on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, everywhere. If you want to go check them out. But we'll be talking about some similar things, what SIRA is and some of the stuff that Amanda does. But we were just talking about, and one of the main focuses I would love for our conversation today would be misconceptions about self-injury. And which one of the cool ones we talked about last time, and why I said injury specifically is because last time me and Amanda talked, she talked about the difference between self-injury and self-harm. So we'll talk about that and some misconceptions about self-injury, and then tools as well. So that's the main focus of today. Why don't you go ahead and just introduce yourself again? Again, tons of people probably seeing you for the first time. So tell us a little bit about Amanda.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda Bosley, and I am the CEO of Self-Injury Recovery Anonymous, which is a global peer support group where we have weekly meetings, multiple meetings a week. We also have some workshops, which is why we're here today, because Cody is our next workshop host, which we're really excited about. And we're just kind of chugging along with lowering the stigma of self-injury, bringing great resources for self-injury, for the people that do engage in self-injury, whether it's from a peer support perspective or bringing in, doctors and people that are focused on how self-injury affects the brain and providing even more tools and resources. We also have our own literature called Layers to Discovery, which is really the first literature of its time, to my knowledge, where people with lived experience have written it themselves. And it was really important to us to have a diverse group when it comes to age, gender, and the type of self-injury that we all engage in. So that's on our site as well, and it helps lead our meetings a lot. And then we're also working on a workbook and a recovery and educational program. So we have a lot in the pipeline.
I love that you guys have that, because sometimes I think about people from outside the bottle come in and try to explain and tell you things that should be this and should be that. And it's just like, sometimes I think about like the concept, like if I was like in the military and I'm like you see like this battle worn dude that's been out, like has done 1,000 missions, has like bruises and cuts everywhere. And it's like, yeah, that dude's a badass. And then you get like this like person that just came in from like school and they've got a lot of book smarts and all that kind of stuff. It's like, which one of these dudes am I going to listen to when I go into the field of battle? And it feels like what you just described is almost like a field guide for self-injury and things like that almost. So that's kind of cool. I like that.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's important to have both perspectives from a clinical aspect and having
True.
experts in NSSI talk about that and the latest research. But I think it's equally as important to have people with lived experience that are creating their own content that is also research backed. So making sure that all of the information is still up to date and correct. But having that lived experience component really changes it, and in my eyes makes it more digestible.
100%. Yeah, I love that. So that's cool. I just thought about that because you talked about that last time. I just thought about it. So that's cool. Yeah, I'm pumped. We're going to be doing a workshop February 22nd. I talk too fast for my own good sometimes. I'm pumped up to be able to get to work with the SIRA Foundation. It's been a long time coming. If you guys want to sign up for that, I just dropped the link to sign up for that in the chat. Tonight, we're going to be talking about some misconceptions about self-injury, self-harm, and be able to ask Amanda some of the most common ones she hears, and then also talk about some tools. I love talking about tools. Let me grab
our website.
Yeah, perfect. I'm putting that in there as well. And then, so I just popped in the website to SIRA as well, Self-Injury Recovery Anonymous, for you guys to check out that as well, and Amanda's website. So I would love to start with some misconceptions. I've got a couple that we talked about last time, but is there any one that pops to your mind first as far as misconceptions about self-injury?
Absolutely. The first one that comes It's like, yes.
Got it.
The first one that comes to mind is that you're trying to kill yourself. That is the
Mm,
first thought that I hear, especially from parents when they'll email me and be like, my kid's trying to kill themselves. Can you help, or can they come to a meeting? And I usually will send them the definition of self-injury and some educational points so they can better understand themselves from, the clinical aspect and the experts' words rather than just mine, which I know I have a lot of thoughts and ideas and read a lot, all the things, but at the end of the day, I'm still not a professional. I'm not an expert, just someone with lived experience that is an advocate. So yeah, I would say that is the first and foremost biggest misconception, which is why the medical term is called non-suicidal self-injury, to help,
yes.
disband that thought and idea. That's not to say that there's not a high correlation between the person that engages in self-injury and suicidal ideation or attempting suicide, because research shows that there is a high correlation, but it's just to be made clear that self-injury itself, that behavior, doesn't mean suicide necessarily. And the behavior itself is really just a maladaptive tool in order to regulate your emotions when you may not have healthier tools to help that situation. So I would say
Mm,
that's number one misconception.
that's the number one. I think that's the number one I saw too. Because I was perusing after we talked last time, because I can't help myself. I love research. And so I was looking at IEEE.org, and there's actually a ton. And I was honestly surprised. There's like some 2020, 2021 research that they have on there. So this isn't like old research necessarily. This is some
1999.
good research.
Yep.
Yeah, no, this is crazy. Some of the newer stuff that they're coming out with, especially in relation to this very concept, them trying to kill themselves, not being necessarily the case. NSSI, could you explain what that is a little bit more specifically for people?
Yes. So NSSI, like I mentioned, it is the technical term, but by definition, it means non-suicidal self-injury is the deliberate self-directed damage of body tissue without suicidal intent and for purposes not socially or culturally sanctioned. So this is it's a 4-part definition really. And that the definition that I just recited is kind of the overarching definition. And then if you go to IEEE's, they'll break it down more, especially when it comes to the line of saying purposes not socially or culturally sanctioned, meaning anything that has to do with religion, or if you're getting piercings or tattoos, they wouldn't technically put that under NSSI, even though with anything, there's always an exception to the rule. But overall, that's what they're talking about. If something is culturally accepted, or it's for a religious reason, or if it's a socially accepted behavior or what have you, then they wouldn't put that under non-suicidal self-injury. For example, also if you do extreme sports, or if you're driving and don't have a seatbelt on, yes, maybe you might want to cause harm to yourself, but that wouldn't be self-injury. That's more of destructive behavior. And continuing on with misconceptions, I would say that's another one. People will lump destructive behavior with NSSI.
Yeah.
That isn't necessarily the case. Like I said, self-injury is a behavior in order to regulate your emotions. Just because you're doing something self-destructive doesn't mean it constitutes as self-injury. As an example, someone doing extreme sports so they can hurt themselves.
Right.
I'd say that's another.
And that one falls under the overarching umbrella of self-harm, correct?
I think for like self-destruction, it really depends on the case. I would, you know what I mean? Like you have to know what are they doing. Also, intent is such an important aspect of
Yes.
SI and the definition, because you have to be intending to purposely, deliberately hurt yourself in order to cause pain, in order to regulate your emotions. So if you did not mean to, for instance, rip off your fingernail and it starts bleeding, if you did not mean to do that, then no, that would not constitute as self-injury. It has to be deliberate. So the intention behind the behavior is very important.
Yeah, I was watching some psychiatrists, psychologists, and some of these people talk about some of these misconceptions, and that was in relation to this NSSI concept. how they differentiate between when people come into their clinics and stuff, how they differentiate. And one of them, like the biggest one they were talking about was intent. And they were saying, like, was there a letter that was talking about what they were trying to do this to end their life versus it was more of a coping mechanism. That's figuring out that intent was one of the most nuanced portions or pieces of the diagnosis that they have to figure out when they're working with people. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, and we see that a lot in our community. People will get really nervous, especially when they might have a lot of recovery under their belt and something happens, or they accidentally scratch themselves, or they draw blood in some way. And they're like, oh no, does this count as a relapse? And my question to them is always, well, what was the intent behind it? I mean, it's just an accident that could happen to anyone. I would not count that as a relapse, even though you might see it as self-injury because you're already in that world and in that mindset. So that's also a misconception within our community, and having to differentiate
that's interesting.
And tell people, maybe that doesn't count. That's really up for you to decide, because I don't know your intent. But if you don't think that was the intent and that was not what you were trying to do, then I wouldn't count that as a relapse. But people get very nervous about that.
Got it. That's interesting. That's cool. So what you just mentioned, you said the word relapse. Could you expand? We talked a little bit about this almost addictive nature of these types of behaviors of self-injury and things like that, some of the chemicals that have to do with them. Could you maybe talk a little bit about, I mean, it's not necessarily a misconception, but could you talk about that? Because you used that word. So I was like, great opportunity.
Yes. So a relapse, it's kind of like what you would think of with, an alcoholic or drug addict. No, NSSI hasn't been the research hasn't backed it as a full-blown addiction. And when it comes to doctors' opinions, the NSSI experts and clinicians I've spoken to, they've all had different opinions on it. Some say it's like an addiction. Some say it has addictive components. Others say it's not an addiction. So it really also depends on who you talk to. My point of view of it is, if that's what helps you and putting a name or label on it helps you, then do that. If it doesn't help you, then don't do it. I think a lot of people want a one-size-fits-all recovery plan, and that just doesn't exist, which is what SIRA tells people all the time. We don't believe in a one-size-fits-all recovery plan. It's really customized and bespoke to you. But the people that do consider it an addiction and see it that way, a relapse is when you have a certain amount of time, if you're counting time, which I'm not one that likes counting. I don't really advocate for it, but like I said, if it helps you, go for it. If they
interesting concept, I like that.
If they self-injure, then that's a relapse to them because they engaged in the behavior. So really, if you're engaging in the behavior and you haven't engaged in a long amount of time, or even if you haven't engaged in 2 days and that's like the longest you've ever had, then they would constitute that as a relapse. I think there's also a great way to reframe relapses, especially for self-injury, because I've found a lot of time through listening to people in our community that they see it as a negative. They see it as they failed, that all of the time that they have was wasted or didn't count. Whereas if you reframe it and see it as, well, this is a learning experience. Now you can kind of work back and think, well, what was happening that day or that week to me? When did I start feeling the urges? So a relapse can really be a great opportunity to figure out and basically investigate everything that was going on, and then make a plan for when that does happen again, or if it does happen again, or something like that. Do you have a plan in place? Do you have tools in place? Do you have a call list of people that you trust that you can call and talk to if you need a distraction? What tools do you use? What did you find didn't help, and that's why you relapsed? And what do you find that does help? So I find that relapses, even though no one would ever choose to relapse, obviously, I find that relapses, if you think about it in that way and reframe it, then it's really a wealth of knowledge for you to improve and evolve even more the next time those urges arise.
Hell yeah, I like that. The feedback, not failure, is a quick little quote. I tried to say that word, but I can't even get it out. But a phrase that I love to use. So, and that you just embodied that very well. So I would agree. I think that's freaking awesome. Are there other misconceptions that you have? I know there's one that I found that I think is an interesting one. But is there any others that you have? Or what'd you say?
I think I was going to ask you which one, but you can tell me after if you want me to go first. I think another big one, which I was guilty of too, especially when I was like deep in the trenches of cutting, that all people that self-injure or engage in self-injury are the same, or they're outcast, or they don't have friends, or they might look the same way, or they might look gothic, or not that there's anything wrong with that. I wear all black most of the days. Like the fact that I'm wearing white is kind of funny. But I live in New York, so it's part of our, look to wear all black 24/7. To me,
Fair
white
enough.
is color.
Noted.
Yeah, I'm like, oh, I'm wearing color today. White to me is color.
Fair enough. Got the old green on.
Yes. So I would say that's a big misconception that, and also, this is the one you might be hitting on, but BPD, they as in, clinicians created like self-injury tools or a self-injury therapeutic method solely based on that diagnosis, thinking only people that have that diagnosis will self-injure, which kind of brings me to another misconception. So I'm just rattling them off.
I love it. We're crushing it.
Which leads me to the next misconception is that if you do engage in self-injury, then you have some type of mental illness, where yes, say there's
that's the one I was going to hit on.
Yeah, there's a very high, number of people that do engage in self-injury that do have mental illness. But I've also met people through our community that say, I feel guilty for engaging in self-injury because I do not have a diagnosis, or I came from a good household. I mean, every household obviously has its problems, but in the fact that they came from a stable household.
Right.
People think you must come from a crazy household. Your parents must have been abusive. You must have some type of diagnosis. And people don't treat self-injury as its own entity. They treat it as a symptom to another mental illness. Whereas I find that if you treat self-injury as its own entity, then you can handle that. Yes, of course, there are always layers to everything, but making self-injury more of a side effect doesn't help with recovering from self-injury and really understanding your emotions that are tied to self-injury.
Right. Yeah, that's the one I was gonna mention, and I 100% agree. It's because something I go on all the time in the stuff that I do with people is the difference between mental health and mental illness, and the spectrum between those two things. And there could be a mental health crisis that dysregulates you to push you into a place where self-injury might become the coping tool, but that does not mean that you have a mental illness necessarily. And so that's been something that's really been really, really interesting, or at least that I've come across. The mental health, mental illness thing is something I talk about all the time. So
I think people really get confused.
Yeah.
So the fact that you brought it up, I think, is really big.
Yeah, it's very confusing. I got a little supporting slide I want to share too. They just show people the difference between the two. Because when you look at the difference between them, I find it super easy. Like if you look at them on like this spectrum or whatever of like mental health versus mental illness, it's way easier to kind of see what the difference might be. Whereas someone who has like mental, like we've been talking about BPD, right? BPD is one that is you can self-harm and self-injure even if you don't have BPD, which is a true fact, or science supports that. Science also supports if you are diagnosed with BPD, which is a serious mental illness, you're like 60 to 80 times or 80% more likely to self-injure. And that would be an example of a mental illness crossing over with self-injury. But that does not mean that you have to have that mental illness to be to self-injure. And so I found this type of chart super, super easy to help people kind of understand that this is a spectrum. Like, and it's interesting because you could have a serious mental illness, but still have optimal mental health. This is like my favorite quadrant that I look at. So It's kind of interesting.
Actually, can you send that to me? I love how it breaks it down.
Yeah, for sure. I'd be happy to. I use it all the time with people. I found it so helpful. So yeah, I'll send it to you afterwards.
I find that since society is talking more about mental health and I hate to say it, but it's kind of like a buzz topic right now, a hot topic right now, which is
Yeah,
good. But with that comes a lot of misinformation because like everyone's just wanting to get on the bandwagon. And I find that when people say like, oh, she has bad mental health, she lives with bipolar disorder, I'm like, well, that's a mental illness. We all have mental health because we all have a brain.
yes, 100 freaking percent agree. There's such a big difference between, like, and the way that I distinguish or help people distinguish is like I have depression versus I feel depressed. Feeling a certain way, feelings are transient. A disorder is a like a more permanent thing necessarily. So it's interesting. I couldn't agree more with you.
Yeah, for sure. I hear that a lot. And I'm always like, we should probably talk about this more because we all have mental health. We all need to focus on it. That's like saying some people, don't have physical health and others do, or something like that. Or like a physical ailment is their physical health issue, or I don't know. I'm not giving a
Right.
good,
I mean, there's a very, very large difference between cancer and a broken bone.
yeah,
Like one is like an injury and one is an illness.
yeah,
Like
that's
there's just such a large difference. It's the same thing. And it's not everybody knows it. So I mean, I'm no judgment.
right.
I just passionate about the same thing you are. So we had a couple comments. Somebody said, I appreciate all breaking down the difference between the two mental health or mental illness. Definitely can be treated / dealt with separately. I reckon that somebody had just mentioned that. And then Cassandra actually mentioned something that I'd be interested to get your opinion on. I don't cut or anything, but I will pull my hair really hard when I'm mad or stressed or sad. Um, First of all, Cassandra, do you have a specific question you want to ask Amanda about that? And then Amanda, is this something that you've heard of before? Is this, because you mentioned there's lots of different types of self-harm, self-injury, different things like that. Any thoughts on that?
So that one can always be a little of a gray area just because,
Okay.
again, it goes back to intent because it can either be trichotillomania or you're pulling your hair under the self-injury umbrella because you're trying to regulate your emotions and it's a coping mechanism. Where I know some people, they'll pull their hair and they're not even noticing it, and it's more of going into the OCD realm and they're just feeling like, I need to do this a certain amount of times, or I need to do this time of day or something like that. So when it comes to that, to differentiate it, I would go back to the intent, and I would say that it would help to maybe go to iTriples and read the full explanation of what self-injury is so you can decipher how you go about engaging in that behavior and why you do it. A lot of people always come to me and say, I'm doing this. Does that count as self-injury? And unless it's like very, lack of a better term, cut and dry, and they're cutting, whether they're cutting themselves or burning themselves, that's very obvious self-injury. But for the gray areas, I'm not qualified to tell you that. But also, I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if anyone's qualified to tell you that because it's really based on your intent, and nobody can tell you your intent but you.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a gray area. But I will say that we do have people in our community that do pull and they count it as self-injury. So I would say educate yourself on the difference between self-injury, trichotillomania, and then, investigate your own emotions. And if you're trying to mask your emotions or regulate them because you're in, a high anxiety state of mind, or you're super depressed, or you're very stressed about something and you don't want to feel it and you're trying to numb your emotions, then I would say, okay, well, think if it can, go under the self-injury umbrella. But I will say it is possible to count it as self-injury. It just really depends, again, on the intent and what you're trying to do.
Intent. Got it. That's interesting. Yeah, that's it's so hard because it's almost like what you said is almost true. Like it doesn't matter how much more professional or experience someone else has. It's really just intent. It's like something you have to decide yourself almost
Yeah.
necessarily. Like it's not like someone can tell you yay or nay. But I guess it could help you come to that conclusion. She actually did comment back. Actually, she said it calms me down to run my fingers through my roots, then grab a huge handful and pull till it hurts. So that's what Cassandra had mentioned. So
again,
based
I'm
on
qualified to
yeah.
diagnose anyone, but going back, that leads me to the offset pain theory, where
Oh my God, yes. I wanted you to tell about this.
it talks about why people go back to self-injury and why urges arise and why it can feel like an addiction. Because when you self-injure, it shows like a graph, like kind of like a hill. And at the bottom of that hill, so to speak, that's when the urge arises. So, okay, now I'm going to break skin. And then it goes up to the top and spikes once that pain happens. But the benefit isn't the pain, it's the come down, which is the release, which starts producing a lot of serotonin and endorphins. The main one was that they found was serotonin, but they were looking into like serotonin and dopamine. So it produces those endorphins. So it's conditioning your brain to think this behavior is positive because it is benefiting you. People wouldn't go back to self-injury if it wasn't beneficial in some way. And that's also, they wanted to look at that also to see why some people won't go towards self-injury and why some people do, because we all feel pain. So why is that not a factor for some, and why is pain a factor for others? And that's why they realize it's not the pain that makes people go back, but it's the release from that pain that makes people come back, because they're thinking, oh, this is working for me, so I'm going to go back to the thing that's working for me. So if you are feeling release after the pain and you're intentionally causing pain in order to feel that relief, then yes, I would look further into self-injury.
Got it. Okay, cool. And I put I triples in the which is one of my new favorite websites, but I put I triples in the chat or whatever, so people
And
can go check that out.
you can become a member as well. I'm a member. So you get access to more research.
Oh, okay, bet. I've just been perusing all their tabs and stuff. I haven't even paid attention to becoming a member.
I'm also going to put in Cornell's self-injury in recovery resources, because that's also a really great site that I like to use. The woman that started the research centers on our foundation, or sorry, on our advisory board, Dr. Whitlock, she's amazing. So I think that's very helpful, especially for parents as well. I would say that one's really helpful. And they also have like templates of worksheets and what you can do to, you know, kind of guide you in, about self-injury and how you want to get better and improve, and, you know, remove self-injury from your life.
Let me put that in the chat.
Also,
Beautiful.
they have great talking points on how to talk to someone about your self-injury if you want to, quote unquote, come out to someone and let them know that you are engaging in this behavior. They have good like speaking points and things to think about before you actually talk to that person, whether it's a friend or a therapist.
That's cool. I like that. The before we, because I want to get into a couple tools here too, but there was another one that I recognized or saw a lot, was that there's a misconception, I feel like, that people, only young people, adolescents or kids, self-injure or self-harm or do things like this, when in reality that's not necessarily the case. So could you speak to that at all? And is that actually a misconception?
I'm so glad you brought that up, because that was one I meant to say but I forgot. So I'm really glad you brought it up. Yes, that's
oh yeah, cool.
And it's very it's very frustrating, just because when you try to find books or just resources all geared towards teenage girls, one, all adults engage in self-injury, and two, yes, it's more likely that it will start in adolescence. Statistically, more people start engaging in the behavior when they are younger, but that doesn't mean it's not going to continue for the rest of their life or until into adulthood. I would say majority of our members are adults. We have fewer teens in our group than we do adults, and it's always been that way. Even back in the 80s, it was all older people. There weren't any young people. And our original peer support group, which had a different name and it wasn't a nonprofit, but the origin of us two middle-aged men started this peer support group. One was 45, the other one was, I think, in his 50s. So I loved
Wow.
the origin story because it totally, goes against the stereotype, because it was two executive men in who are in their 40s and 50s. So it really can touch anyone. Self-injury does not discriminate.
Nice. Well, I mean, I guess not nice, but it's good to know that it's not just young people, and not just one gender or anything as well. So that's cool, and I like that. That's an interesting, a small nod to a guy starting companies, which is usually more about like women companies and that kind of stuff. But in this case, it kind of busts that myth just by itself. So that's kind of cool.
For sure.
Sweet. So I'd love to spend a little bit of time talking a little bit about, I think one of the biggest things that can help with self-injury is awareness. So a lot of the stuff we've been talking about already is probably like one of the best tools. As with anything in relation to these types of things, awareness is a huge, huge piece. But I would love to be able to chat about, obviously I've got my opinions, or not opinions, but tools that I love that I use with my own client, that when I work with people that are self-injuring or those types of things. But I would love to hear some of the tools, because you've done this for a long time. You've been through it yourself. I would love to hear some of the tools that maybe you found most effective, ones that you were like, whoa, this blew my mind, things like that, and just talk about a couple of those.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know if my case is unique, or I just needed less tools, or I don't know, maybe it's just the way I work. I'm not sure. I'm kind of one of those people, like, tell me once, keep it that way. I was about to say, is this I thought there was a dog.
No, that is my dog. She likes to get snippy with me.
Oh.
Ollie, you have to go outside? Yeah, Dad, I do. She's okay. She makes she says hi to everybody in our lives all the time. So everybody, the audience will know Ollie, but that's where the noise came from. Sorry about that.
No, you're good.
You're talking about tools though, and you were a little bit different in relation to using tools.
Maybe, and I probably used the wrong word, maybe not different, but I felt like I didn't need to try a lot of that many things out, because once I figured out how to give myself compassion and really built
Oof.
my self-love, because such a common denominator, and I would say the biggest common denominator in my opinion, is low self-esteem. Find that people's self-esteem, myself included, is like in the negatives. It's not even like a 2, it's literally negative.
Right.
So for me, when I started going to the meetings, I realized I didn't have any love for myself. I find that a lot of people that self-injure are incredibly empathetic towards others, but they're not empathetic towards themselves. They will care
Right.
so much about other people, but if they took that mindset and for themselves, they would think that's crazy, myself included.
Right.
So for me, that was the biggest thing. And that's what's kept the consistency and longevity of me staying self-injury free, is just because I continue to work at it. It's not like all of a sudden one day you're just like, I have self-compassion and I have self-love for myself. It's just constant work. There's never a moment where you're like, oh, my tank's full.
I love it. It's like eating. You can get full in one meal, but you'll get hungry again.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a continuous struggle and triumph and practice to keep doing it over and over and over again. So I would say that was the biggest thing for me. That was the biggest tool, because then it just really got to the root of my problem for me, just because then I thought to myself, well, I don't want to hurt my body, because I have more respect for myself and me and my body now, and I just don't want to hate myself anymore.
I like that. I feel like that's at a core, especially in the stuff that when I work with people with anxiety, depression, like stress, especially high functioning anxiety, that which is a little bit outside of like self-injury specifically, but self-compassion, self-love, and curiosity towards self is like so many things lead to like unworthiness, feeling unworthy, not good enough, those types of feelings and beliefs, thoughts and beliefs. underlie a lot of stuff, I feel like.
Awesome. I feel like that's just like the holy grail of whatever issue you're going through. It's just like, if you can get to that, then it's going to be a lot easier for you.
Yeah, I agree. So, so self-love, compassion. That's beautiful. Was there a specific process you used to develop that skill? Or one technique or trick or tip that you use in relation to self-love, self-compassion? Like, for example, Mel Robbins. Like, I love Mel Robbins. Every morning when she wakes up, she goes and stares in the mirror and says, "I love you," and just stares herself right in the eyes. Like, that's like a small kind of funny one, but was there any maybe more serious ones or more powerful ones that you've used, like specific techniques for it?
One, I think it was being part of this peer support group and seeing others get better, which was like a lot of encouragement.
Mm,
It kind of bounce ideas of what worked for them, what works for you, what doesn't. So that's also kind of like the power of peer support, is that you can get that encouragement, you can learn from others, whether it has to do with a relapse or whether it has to do with, like, I have 10 years of being self-injury free. So for me, it was quite,
nice.
yes, it was intentional, but it's also organic because I didn't realize a lot of it was happening while it was happening. And it was just me observing and also asking for help. Asking for help was the hardest thing in the world. Having to call
Okay.
and be like, I feel this way, and not feeling like you're a burden, because I also find that a lot of people that self-injure feel like they're a burden. So removing that thought from my brain was extremely hard. And then
Wow.
I had to be like, you know what, screw the burden, you know, thinking, and, you know, I'm not a burden, and this person told me to call them, so I'm going to call them. But calling people was the hardest thing for me, but I didn't realize that was helping kind of chip away from the self-injury, because the more I talked about it, the less I felt isolated, which is a huge component of self-injury. The isolation is really big. So then when you start talking about it, and especially with a group of people or even one person, you're chipping away at the problem, because you're saying, I'm no longer alone in this. This isn't just me. And now I can actually create a support system, whether it's peer support, doctor, family, friends, or a plethora of all of them. So that was really big, just reaching out to people and saying, I am not a burden. I am worth the time. I am worth this conversation. I am worth getting better. My body, my mind is all worth this recovery journey.
Oh yeah, I love it. I like you repeating it out loud too, to all the people out there. Everyone out here. I love to tell people they matter. Like, every time I hang up or I leave, I'm like, you matter, because it's true. So I love hearing that you've
Another,
got that level of hype for yourself.
yeah, you have to hype yourself up, even if you don't even believe it. I tell people, lie to yourself until you don't. Fake it till you make it, even with yourself. Like, even if you don't love yourself, say you love yourself, because eventually you will start to believe it. So if you have to fake it to yourself, then fake it to yourself. Um,
Nice.
but tool that I really like, that wasn't, I didn't use it, but I've had other people talk about it, and I find that it really helps them. And I think it's a really cool way. I wish I knew it back then. Um, Even though I do not believe in counting or anything like that, and we can always talk about that. But when it comes to timing, if you have an urge, someone told me what she used to do is she would put 1 minute on her clock, on her timer, on her.
Ooh,
If she went 1 minute without engaging in self-injury, that was the win. The purpose is not to stop self-injuring. The purpose is to see how long you can go, to show yourself that you are capable.
oh
So
yeah.
that I found really important and really cool, just because it wasn't putting pressure to just completely stop. It was just saying, hey, I can take this minute. And then once she hit a minute, she would add more time. So she would go 5 minutes, she'd go an hour, see if she can go a few days. And I thought that was really cool. And I've also heard doctors talk about that as well. And even if their client or the person did engage in the behavior after the timer went off, it was still a triumph, because you showed yourself you're capable and what you're capable of. And next time you can go even further. Cold turkey does not work. It's all about self injury reduction. So
Nice. It's neurologically potent too. The that technique is called positive cargo loading, and is shifting your like this neural structure of that behavioral pattern in your brain, because usually it's a bad loop, bad thoughts, bad behavior, bad thoughts, bad behavior, and it's like bad to bad, bad to bad. But when you add in that pause, even just for a minute, it's bad to good to bad, and it breaks that closed system in your like nervous system. So that's an interesting that you mentioned that, because that's a tool that's 100% backed by neuroscience. It's a behavioral change technique, and that's some of my most extensive research. So I love that. That's late that you mentioned that one.
Amazing. I'm aligning with neuroscience.
Hell yeah, I do too. Okay, that's cool. I like that. The other thing I was thinking when you're talking about the self-love, self-worth, and not feeling like a burden, what was the first phone call that you had to make? Like, what got you to over the hump of, I'm going to make this phone call? Was there a moment that you had, or like a realization, or was there something specific that clicked in your mind necessarily? And if there's nothing there, it's completely my bad on the question, but I'm just curious, like in that moment, was there?
So it's when I started going to peer support group, and the founder, James, told me, hey, call me on this day at this time. And he was just like, even if I don't answer, leave a message. The point isn't me answering. The point is you reaching out and calling. And so for a few weeks, I did not do it. I was just like, it's fine. Like, he's not going to remember. It doesn't matter. People are in their own world, have their own lives. But then after a while, he was like, just call. Like, who cares what I'm doing? Just take that step. So it was really him that encouraged me to start calling and reaching out. And once I did, it was kind of crazy how powerful it was. Something so simple and also scary was equally as powerful, if not more, just because it taught me and showed me. It was like a breakthrough. It was like, okay, this is part of the recovery journey for me, and I had to learn how to reach out, which was
Nice.
really, yeah.
I love that. That kind of sound. So I work a lot with anxiety. Like, one of the biggest things I work with, and it's interesting, like the way you're describing this, because a lot of my clients that go through intense anxiety, like what they almost always, because facing the fear. Like, I mean, bottom line of how to work with anxiety is facing the fear.
I'm so sorry. My boss is looking at me like I'm crazy because I'm still here. Hi, sorry. I'm on a live stream.
Oh,
No, you're good. What's up?
nothing. I just want to know if you're.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't know if you left already.
Oh, no. No, it's okay.
Duty calls.
Yeah, he's trying to talk to me about this project, and I'm just like, I'm busy.
But you were just talking about, like, on the other side of the getting over the fear, or getting over or not getting over, it's too aggressive a word, but getting past the barrier of like reaching out and feeling like you're not a burden. And I was just so interesting, because on the other side of, I work a lot with anxiety, and on the other side of fear is always confidence. Like, after you skydive 1,000 times, you're pretty freaking confident about it, even though it's scary at first. And so it's just interesting how our brains are kind of wired that way, it feels like.
Yeah, I learned that you really just have to push through the pain and be comfortable with the uncomfortable.
Right. Which is a tough thing to learn. To actually get into a flow state as well, but that's a whole different live stream. So I digress on that. But I work on lots of things. But that's cool. I like that. I love the self-compassion as well. It's a tool that I love to use. Looking at, and we'll talk about this in the workshop that we're up to, is because the bottom line of some of the tools I'll talk about in that workshop is self-love, compassion, curiosity, and a specific methodology for achieving that self-love towards yourself. And so I love that that's already something that's inside of the minds of people in SIRA and stuff. So that's cool. And I also dropped the SIRA link to SIRA's website, as you were talking about, a peer support group being so important to your recovery. So that's cool. All right, sweet. So we've been on for a while now, probably about time for us to wrap up here. I would love if you have any other tools or misconceptions or any other last thing that you want to talk about before we hop off here. I'll give you the mic in the last word.
Something came to mind when you were talking about curiosity. I think one thing that's not talked about enough. I mean, self-injury in general isn't talked about enough, but an idea in particular where I've never really heard much about it is the curiosity of why you self-injure, but not even that, because it's quite like shallow, but going a step deeper. And what helped me a lot was befriending my self-injury and acknowledging what it's done for me, and acknowledging that that was the first relationship I've ever had. It wasn't with a person, it was with self-injury. So there was a breakup and grieving process. It's okay to grieve
Nice.
about your self-injury. It's okay to love your self-injury. And so I had to learn to really get to know it and get to know the behavior and get to know how I really think about behavior. I think we're always so focused on it's bad for you. It's bad for you. Don't do it. But on the flip side, it's like, well, you wouldn't have kept doing it if there wasn't something to it. So it's okay to say, hey, thank you. I don't need it anymore. I'm going to go the healthy route. But I literally wrote a breakup letter to my self-injury in my journal years ago. And that really changed a lot for me, because I let go of the guilt I had about engaging in the behavior. And instead, I was just like, I'm going to talk about the love I have for it that I feel like is not acceptable to admit. But once I kind of like thanked it and had gratitude towards it, even though it's maladaptive and not the way to go, and it's important to get help and all the things, there's still a component to it where you're like, I have this intimate relationship with this behavior. And for me, it kept me alive. I've had many suicide attempts. And for me, self-injury was my way of white knuckling through life. So I had to acknowledge what it did do for me and be okay
Mm.
with having love for it, so I could say goodbye and move on.
Yeah, that's hugely powerful when you're like drilling directly into the framework that we'll actually talk about in the workshop that I'm going to do, like a framework to do exactly that, and a way to look at those parts with love, caring, compassion, because that part of you is and was trying to protect you, still is if it's still around. So it's interesting. People that I guess most of the people that I talk to generally know, we talk like internal family systems is the concept that we talk a lot about. Managers, firefighters, and exiles are kind of the main parts that give people problems. And we talk about firefighters, like the react and distract people that keep you away from super, like you had mentioned, suicide even. It keeps you away from immensely powerful things like that. And so it is a protector in a way. And the moment that you recognize that that part is trapped in time, a young part of you that was created to protect you, and you can look at it as like the 6-7-year-old Amanda that was created in an instant when your nervous system was young and didn't know how to protect you. And so it chose to do that to protect you from something even worse. It becomes a lot easier to create that curiosity, love, and less shame and guilt, because it turns it into a kid, which is a part of you. And that's how we're all made neurologically, is like stacked upon rules that kids made when they were too young to know what to do. And so when that kid is throwing a tantrum, would you ever throw a kid in the closet and run away? No. You go to that kid, show it love, show it compassion. What's going on? What's wrong? You're curious, right? You're calm. You help it regulate, and recognize, listen to it, validate it, understand it. You don't shove it back down. And so it's really interesting. You meant that was like such a, I love the breakup letter. Like all the stuff you're talking about is like dead on stuff. When I see people have the biggest breakthroughs in the work that I do with them, it's when they get to that point and can accept themselves, and they are able to talk to themselves, love themselves, not be shameful or guilt themselves. And so, or that part of them especially, and they recognize it like you did as a protector. So that's badass.
Yes. And it's also in our literature. In one of our layers, it's a breakup little in there that you can.
What a great way to freaking drop in. Cool. Well, I'm pumped. This and more. This is like the perfect ending because we talked about exactly what I'm going to talk about in some of the stuff I'm going to talk about, at least in the workshop. So it's a free workshop that's on February 22nd, and we're pumped. So I'm going to let me drop the link in the chat again. All right, I just dropped the link in the chat again. Click on that link, go sign up for free. Amanda will be there. I'll be there. There'll be lots of people there. Gwen will be there. So it'll be a fun time. I'm excited. Thank you so much for hopping on with us tonight. And we'll be back live, I think, next Wednesday, again, next Wednesday, the week before, I believe, the 22nd. So I'm excited.
Thank you so much. It's always so much fun chatting with you and, learning more about the brain and getting to talk about self-injury, which I love to talk about, which is probably a very strange sentence to say, but I love talking about self-injury.
You broke up with it, so now you can talk about it like an ex. It's like, oh yeah, that was the old me.
Yeah. Exactly.
Cool. Sweet. Thank you so much. Thanks everybody who tuned in tonight. Hope you all have a great